What's up, everybody? It's Dakota, and today we're going to be going over something new that was spoiled or revealed during the World Magic Championship this past weekend. And it's the complete deck list for the four challenger decks that we were getting for 2020. I did this last year where I kind of just went over the decks, just kind of went through the deck list, what I thought about each one of them, so on and so forth. So I figured I'd do it again this year. It seemed like it was relatively popular, so we'll go through it again. This year, obviously, being completely different, we had like a Phoenix style deck. We had mono red, mono white, and then we had like an explorer type deck. I believe was the other one. I don't know. It was like pretty forgettable, and then like three of probably like the best archetype at the time when they came out. So gonna be going over this again. For people that don't know, challenger decks are 75 card decks, 60 card main deck with a 15 card sideboard, intended to be playable and competitive at a local level right out of the box. All cards have been previously printed in standard and are standard legal. These are available worldwide in English, with Japan available in Japan. Obviously, getting into the deck list and things like that. Uh, so the first one is Allied Fires, which is basically a Jeskai Fires deck, which is something that's been very popular. This one being way different than the normal Jeskai Fire decks that you see that are playing like the Cavaliers. This one is more of like the Planeswalker version, playing Sarkin the Masterless, Ugins, Kazmina, which is a planeswalker that doesn't really show up all that often. I don't think she's like necessarily very good, but like her passive ability is pretty powerful as in these kind of decks. So might make it worth it, at least again for like a considering the level of play that these are meant for. Four Narset Parter Avails, which is really surprising because Narset's pretty expensive. I mean, like I think it's probably just $10 just in Narsets right there in the deck. Also, Narset being really good in this deck because she hits over half of your deck, so you're very likely to at least see two cards in your Narset piles that you can take. And then Saheeli Sublime Artificer to make tokens and things like that is like basically your payoffs and cards that you can play. There's one Kenrith the Return King, which is really powerful. From the look at like the mana base and things like that, you're only ever going to be able to activate the red, blue, and white modes on him, which are probably the pretty like the most relevant modes that you can pick on this. Fey Wishes to get some cards from the sideboard, which we'll go over in a second. Deafening Clarion's a sweeper, drawn from dreams to dig for cards because this is like a standard legal dig through time. Time Wipe to control the board, basically alongside Deafening Clarion. The aforementioned Fires, which kind of is like the big payoff for this deck. Banishing Light for some interaction, Omen of the Sea for some scrying and draw power. In this, you also get a Steam Vents, one of each temple in the Jeskai colors, four interplanar beacons. You get some of these tap lands that gain you life, and then some basic lands as well. In the sideboard, which is very important because, again, we just went over Fave Wishes, there's one Sarkin, a Mass Manipulation, Devout Decree, Dovin's Veto, Revoke Existence, another Time Wipe, an Ashiok Dream Render, Dovin Hand of Control, two Fry, and three Thirst remaining as targets that you can get with Fave Wishes. So overall, I kind of like this Fires deck. You have four. You get a four of the namesake card. Kenrith the Return King is really powerful. If you want to upgrade this into the Cavalier version, I believe that the red and blue Cavalier are relatively cheap. So basically, a lot of the times you're going to see like you're going to want to upgrade the mana base for these decks, like especially this one with 10 tap lands and only like one Steam Vents. Like if you have any shock lands of like these colors, I would just try to play those if you can, if you have them. Maybe if you want to play like hair to like maybe two more temples, like that would be fine. Like as far as that goes, like that's really all you have to do to upgrade it to really get it close to the tier 1 standard version that you see being played. Well, that was played at the Mythic Championship, and probably things you'll see moving forward. The next one is Final Adventure, and you kind of already see the other deck too. Final Adventure is basically green black adventures, which I think is basically like the green black deck that we had last year, where like it has some good cards in it, but I think it's probably like the least. It has probably the highest ceiling, but like one of the lowest floors. You get a Vraska Galari Queen, which is pretty sweet. Four Edgewall Innkeeper, some Blacklands Paragons, Knight of the Even Legions, four Lovestruck Beasts, which is pretty exciting, honestly. Midnight Reaper, even though it's going to rotate out of standard soon, is pretty good. Murderous Rider, probably going to be a standard staple for as long as it's in standard. Falmer Knight, which is the draw a card dude, and also Death Toucher. Order of Midnight to pick stuff up out of the graveyard, and just a 2/2 flyer for 2. Spin Swordsman to drain your opponent, and it's a 2/1 lifelinker, which is pretty good. Fine Finality, you can pick these guys back up, or you can just sweep the board. Disfigure for a little bit of interaction. And for Lucky Clover, the thing I kind of wish they would have had in here was the Giant that lets you search for a basic land and put it in a play, because that's a card that like a lot of people play with Lucky Clover, just like copy it and get 2 lands out of your deck, especially also seeing that there's playing like 15 basic lands in here. There's 2 Castle Locthwains, a Fabled Passage, which is pretty sweet, 2 of the Green Black Temple, 3 Jungle Hollow, and 7 to 8 Swamps, or 7 Forest, 8 Swamps. Again, probably want to play, I would say, some number of I mean, if you have 4 Overgrown Tomb, just throw 4 Overgrown Tomb in here. If you have the other 2 Temple of Maladies, put them in there. And that basically like replaces the Jungle Hollow and some of the basic lands as well. As far as like the spells and things like that, I think that this is pretty okay. I'm sure that there's some adventure spells that I'm like not thinking of that would be really good to play, but yeah, so far like just this looks fine on its own as far as like the creatures and spells and things like that. The land base you definitely want to upgrade to be more flexible and things like that, and have more untapped lands, or at least have if you're gonna play temples, just gives you something to actually do with your lands coming into play tapped. In the sideboard, there's some Massacre Girl, Duress, Noxious Grasp, Cling to Dust, which is some graveyard hate, Crawl Harpooner, which is a card that we've seen a lot in Standard, and Thrashing Bronzodon. Really, like, the more and more you kind of go through these, I think the more and more you'll see that these sideboards are tuned to be played against the other decks and things like that. Obviously, there's probably better sideboard cards that you can play in all of these decks, just depending on your meta and things like that. But so far, like, I'm not too upset with like the green black one. Like I said, I think it's probably has like the one of the highest potentials, but also probably like the lowest floor. This definitely isn't like something. This isn't something that's doing anything really cool, but it does get the job done. It does kill your opponent and things like that. So overall, like, I don't think you go wrong with getting this while also getting like a few cards like Castle Locthwain. If you play Pioneer, those cards are really good in Pioneer. Knight of the Even Legion, Black Lance Paragon. If you have some of the other knights, you can be Black Red Knights or Marty Knights, things like that. Or Lovestruck Beast, basically slots in like the girl decks and things like that. Overall, like, there's just a lot of like playable cards in here, even if this deck just isn't the most powerful or anything like that. The next one, Cavalcade Charge, is a mono red deck. Basically, the draw to playing this is this guy right here. The only thing that sucks, and I kind of understand why, there's only one Embercleave. If you have more copies of Embercleave, throw it in here. Like, this card is busted and really powerful, and there's a reason why people say believe in the cleave, because this card just like kills your opponent out of nowhere sometimes, and it's really great. Chandra, Acolyte of Flame, helps make a ton of dudes, or I guess specifically 2 1/1s with haste that get exiled at the end of the turn. Obviously go with Cavalcade of Calamity, which is what this deck is named after. Basically, whenever a creature you control with power 1 or less attacks, Cavalcade deals 1 damage to that player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. So you have Bone Crusher Giant is like some interaction. Fervent Champion is a 1 power thing that triggers when it attacks. So it'll trigger Cavalcade, and if you have another Fervent Champion in play, you can basically swing with 2/1 first strikers that also just collectively dealt 2 damage to your opponent or a planeswalker they were attacking. Runaway Steamkin just gets better, snowballs, out of control. Torbrand really helps you go off when you have like when you curve Fervent Champion into like even just Runaway Steamkin or Fervent Champion into Cavalcade into Chandra into Torbrand. Just deals a ton of damage to your opponent and makes it really hard for them to win the game. Rimrock Knight, pump spell plus a body is pretty good, and it's also a knight, so Fervent Champion can pump it. Score Spitter, basically just cavalcated on a stick. Whenever it attacks, it deals damage to a player or planeswalker it's attacking. When you have Cavalcade out, this dude's just dealing 2 damage when he attacks. Pretty sweet in my book. Tin Street Dodger, another 1/1 that has haste, and then you can pay a red so that it can't be blocked except by creatures with Defender. And of course, you have 4 light up the stage. The Embercleave, which is just amazing. And again, if you have more copies of it, please play more copies of it. The lands, you have 18 mountains, very straightforward, and 3 Castle Embereth, which is really good when you're going wide and you have like a Torbrand out in play as well. In the sideboard, Experimental Frenzy, Shock is a 4 of, Tybalt, Rakish Instigator, 3 Satyr's Cunning, and 3 Slaying Fire. All looks good. Again, like there's some other like upgrades to the sideboard and things like that. I know that there was an article written by Andrea Mangucci about playing mono red in standard, which would probably be the direction that you take this deck in. Obviously, besides just playing 4 Embercleave and just cleaving your opponent, get them dead. Everything else like is pretty stock. Like this is probably like the most ready out of the box deck. You're just looking at getting like some Annex and more Embercleaves, and this is basically the mono red deck that was played at the World Championships this past weekend. So not a bad buy if mono red's your thing. The last one, Flash of Ferocity, which is going back to the green-blue Flash decks that we saw in Standard about 2 seasons ago. It was around at the beginning of Eldraine, then it kind of fell off with all the other decks and stuff. Obviously, Oko and the food decks taking over, and then they finally got banned. And green blue really never found its place back in the format, but definitely still a viable strategy nonetheless. Brazen Borrower has proven to be really good, even with people saying that Brazen Borrower might even be better than Vendilion Click, which is crazy to think if you're an older player, because Vendilion Click feels like it does so much. Brazen Borrower also does a lot too, especially when you staple a spell on top of the spell. Nightpack Ambusher, basically if you don't play a spell on your turn, or at the beginning of your end step, if you didn't cast a spell this turn, you make a 2/2 wolf. That becomes a 3/3 because of this guy. And he also has Flash, Wave Break, Hippocamp, which rewards you by playing spells on your opponent's turn by letting you draw a card. Wildborn Preserver, you're not really playing any humans in this deck, so normally you'll get to just spend any unspent mana that you want to just make this thing bigger. And it also has Reach, so it can tag some pretty pesky flyers, and also just be a surprise attacker on turn 2 as well. Brineborn Cutthroat, same thing. Kind of rewards you for playing spells on your opponent's turn by getting bigger, also having Flash as well. Frilled Mystic, just a Flash creature with counter that counters a spell when it enters the battlefield. Spectral Sailor, a card that lets you be aggressive in the early game, but then also give you something to do with your mana in the late game. Thassa's Intervention, modal counterspell plus pseudo dig through time. Opt, just a draw spell that you can play on your opponent's turn, does all the things that your other cards care about, basically being able to be played on your opponent's turn. Quench for a little bit of interaction, Sinister Sabotage as like a hard counter, and then also a little bit of card advantage by being able to surveil, and then Unsummon for some tempo, because if you just get one or two blockers out of the way, and your Brineborn Cutthroat gets in for 5 or 6, or your team of Nightpack Ambushers and friends just get in, all really good stuff, and Unsummon can make for some pretty bad blocks. The land base, Castle Vantress, another Fabled Passage, some Temple of Mystery, Thornwood Falls, and then 8 Forest, 8 Islands. Real quick, probably with this, you probably don't want to be playing Fabled Passage in this deck, in all honesty. Realistically, you probably don't even want to be playing, definitely don't want to be playing Thornwood Falls. Just playing, the breeding pools would be a good place to start. Maybe even playing another Temple of Mystery, and things like that, just to really make sure that you have an ample number of untapped sources and very few tap lands in the early game, just so you can be able to play your 3 and 4 mana spells on time on your opponent's turn, while also trying to leave up some of this interaction as well in the early games, just to kind of tempo your opponent out. So that is, the sideboard, duh. 3 Shifting Ceratops, some Disdainful Strokes, Negates, Aether Gust, a Mystical Dispute, and Threnody Singer. Wow. Huh, that card's pretty cool. Another Flash dude, sweet. Some actually pretty good, Shifting Ceratops is actually really good. Aether Gust, another really good one as well. So this deck has some good cards on the sideboard as well. That's really it for all the new challenger decks and things like that. I would say, as far as value, if you're just a person that's going to go off of value, I think you're best off going with either Allied Fires or possibly even Flash of Ferocity, just because the Brazen Borrowers, Castle Vantress, the Fabled Passage that's in there. The Thoughts as Intervention isn't worth a whole lot, but it's goes into some other decks, so that'd be a sweet card to pick up. Nightpack Ambusher also going into the decks, and of course Brazen Borrower is just a really powerful blue card, as always. Shifting Ceratops, a good sideboard card. Aether Gust, Mystical Dispute, Disdainful Stroke, Negate. A lot of these cards slot into other decks as well, so you really won't have any trouble, even if you just buy this to take it apart and get other things for Temur Reclamation, or some of the other ramp deck type things. Flash of Ferocity is definitely a good one. If you just want to play a Fire's Invention deck and you have the Cavaliers, or you have another Kenrith the Returned King and some more Fae of Wishes, you can definitely pimp out the sideboard to have better non-creature spells to go get. Playing more Kenrith is also really good, because as we saw, Kenrith can be a house against a lot of decks. Also, if you have the Cavaliers, you can cut some of these other Planeswalkers that aren't necessarily that great. Aside from that, this definitely has some good value too. I mean, you get a lot of rare Planeswalkers, and Sarkhan, Ugin, the other ones on the sideboard, the Fires of Invention, a Steam Vents that comes in it, which is pretty sweet. And some of the temples, Interplanar Beacons, so you don't really have to try to find somebody or go to your store and try to find these. All pretty good. Deafening Clarion, Draw from Dreams, Time Wipe, all just really good cards. So I think as far as value plus being into decks that have a lot of value and can transfer into other decks, Allied Fires and the Flash of Ferocity deck are really good. If you're looking for a deck that is going to probably take the minimal amount of upgrades to be a tier 1 deck, you're probably looking at Cavalry Charge, just because you really just need Annex and Embercleave and cutting the Cavalcade of Calamities, and you basically have the championship deck that we saw in the World Champion, or not really championship deck, but the top 4 Seth Manfield's deck that he played in the World Championship. So, yeah, that's going to do it for this video altogether. Just going over the Challenger decks. They look sweet. I definitely think they might be more spread out in terms of like power level compared to last year's ones. Definitely heard some like good things about those ones though. So like I expect to hear the same thing about these challenger decks moving forward. Pretty sweet. Definitely a lot of rares. Definitely a lot of good and pretty expensive cards to make it worth your money. Just buying these and playing them straight out of the box. Hopefully with some sleeves. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown analysis of the decks. Leave a comment like what deck you would most look forward to getting if you were going to buy one of these. Make sure to subscribe to my channel. I do a lot of deck techs for Modern, Pioneer, and Standard. And I do some videos like this just going over some cool stuff or anything that's really happening in like our giant and Magic community because someone always has something to talk about. And yeah, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you.